Good morning. I'm Dave, and I'm pleased we get to open the scriptures together today. Aside from our break during Advent, since last summer, we've been studying Jesus' famous Sermon on the Mount, line by line, in a series called Upside Down, because Jesus keeps taking everything we thought we knew and turning it upside down, or maybe turning everything we twisted upside down back right side up again. Already, we've heard his surprising insights about everything from prayer to adultery. And today, we're picking up the sermon as Jesus begins teaching us about money, which begins, "Do not store up for yourselves treasures on earth, where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. But store up for yourselves treasures in heaven, where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal." Almost all of us have heard this before, but aren't sure what it means. How do you store up treasure in heaven? Where is heaven? And if heaven's where we sit on clouds in white togas playing harps or singing praise songs in a perpetual church service, what treasures would you want there? 7 years ago, I preached a simple sermon about heaven, which really surprised people. Not because I was saying anything novel, but because, as weird as it seems, most Christians have never heard a sermon about heaven. Most of us hope to go there forever. So it's odd that so few of us have any idea what heaven is or why it'd be so great to go. So before we explore what Jesus says about storing up treasure in heaven, I want to remind you why we treasure heaven. Before becoming a Christian, I thought I already knew all about heaven, from the iconic cartoons of pudgy people with wings sitting quietly on the clouds. I know it's supposed to look restful, but frankly, I think it looks boring. When I first started following Christ, people told me I had it all wrong. Heaven's like a 24/7 worship service in which people from every tribe, tongue, and nation and century gather around the throne of God to sing praise songs forever. But that's not much better. Don't get me wrong, worshiping with a group of passionate Christians can be thrilling. But after 3 worship services every Sunday, some weeks I'm sick of singing by the end. So the prospect of singing nonstop for eternity feels painful. That sounds more like punishment to me. I can relate to Billy Joel's 1977 hit song in which he lamented,
"When they say there's a heaven for those who will wait, and some say it's better, but I say it ain't. I'd rather laugh with the sinners and cry with the saints. The sinners are much more fun."
Now, I know that can't be theologically correct, but it's true that heaven, the way some Christians describe it, doesn't sound like a place I'd want to go. But it turns out the heaven described in the Bible is nothing like that. The Bible has lots to say about heaven, but somehow modern American Christians have missed it. And this is so important, because by making heaven sound boring, the devil has dulled our excitement about going there and convinced us that we'd better do whatever we can on earth to live as long as possible and experience as much pleasure as possible, including by spending as much money on ourselves as possible. And that's what we now call the American dream. But people like Paul and John, who actually experienced heaven, saw life completely differently. Paul wrote, "To die is gain. I desire to depart and be with Christ, which is better by far." Their vision of heaven shaped the way they invested their time and treasure here on earth. And those people became the kinds of lovers, leaders, and servants that healed the sick, fed the poor, ended slavery, overturned unjust policies and entire empires. They changed the world because they longed for heaven. I know that. But I can get so caught up in the drama of daily life that I forget the bigger story that this life is a short but essential part of. And as that happens, my joy gets dulled. My hope fades. My cynicism grows. My fears seem more real. My obedience takes a back seat to expedience. Maybe you've experienced some of that in your own life. But reflecting again on heaven this week has reinvigorated my hope and joy and put my disappointments into perspective and reminded me why following Jesus is such a blessing. So even though I've preached this before, our staff decided that we all need regular reminders of what we're looking forward to so that you can spend your life and treasure in ways that make sense in light of reality and eternity. Before we go any further, I want to address one of the central objections to heaven, which is that it can't be real because we haven't seen it. It doesn't show up in our telescopes. But scientists agree that roughly 95% of our universe is made up of dark matter, substance that we can't see or study, but we know is there. Beyond that, scientists at Harvard, MIT, and other universities use string theory to postulate that there are 10 observable dimensions and likely an infinite number of imperceptible universes. If this is what our leading scientists believe, why should anyone feel self-conscious about believing in one dimension beyond our view? So, what's heaven like? Today I want to give you a small glimpse from the scriptures. I'll go quickly, and I'm going to refer to too many Bible passages for you to remember them all. But at the end, I'm going to point you to some resources where you can learn more. And all these scriptures will be loaded into the Hierarch app by Monday so that you can examine them more closely at home. Most people assume that when we die, we go to heaven, which is a peaceful place in the clouds where we play harps and hang out with God forever. And while that's not entirely wrong, it's far from right. The Bible teaches that when we die, those who belong to Jesus leave our bodies behind and join Jesus and the other departed saints in some other dimension with God, which we commonly call heaven or paradise. This is what Jesus was talking about when he told the repentant thief hanging on the cross next to him, "Today you'll be with me in paradise." That place will be marvelous because we'll be with God, but we'll not stay there forever. While there, it's not clear what kind of bodies we'll have because our flesh and blood will be sleeping in the earth while our souls are in that temporary paradise where we'll wait until God brings this age to an end. And like kids in the back of the car who can't wait to get to Disney World, while there, we'll join the saints crying out, "How long?" urging God to hasten final judgment and bring injustice to an end. Because when he finally does, Paul writes, the Lord himself will come down from heaven, and the dead in Christ will rise first. After that, we who are still alive and are left will be caught up together with them in the clouds to meet the Lord in the air. And so we will be with the Lord forever. The biblical picture is not that we'll escape this world and live with God up in heaven. It's much better. It's that God will come to this world, redeem it, renew it, restore it, and live with us here forever. Revelation 21 explains, "Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and there was no longer any sea." In the scriptures, the sea is a metaphor for chaos and fear, while rivers are a source of sustenance and life. In the age to come, there will be no more chaos, no more fear, no more sea. Then in verse 3, we read that God's dwelling place is now among the people, and he will dwell with them. This is just like Eden, when God was with Adam and Eve in a way that we haven't experienced since sin screwed everything up. Verse 4, he will wipe every tear from their eyes. There will be no more death. God will conquer our last and greatest enemy. He who is seated on the throne said, I am making everything new. It's a recreation, everything put back the way it was designed to be in the first place. Turns out that Belinda Carlisle had it right.
Ooh, baby, do you know that's what? Ooh, heaven is a place on earth.
Or at least it will be. God's not going to abandon his creation, he's going to restore it. We won't go to heaven and leave earth behind. Rather, God will bring heaven and earth together with no wall of separation. What the Bible describes is not some far-off place we can't imagine, but instead something very much like what we already see all around us. God's creation, but no longer marred by sin, death, hatred, and decay. It will be life as God created it to be originally. Several centuries after Michelangelo painted the glorious Sistine Chapel ceiling, a restoration project removed the accumulated dirt and candle soot. People loved the ceiling before, but look at the remarkable difference. You can see that it's the same scene, but the original color and brilliance is restored. This is the iconic creation of Adam, before and after. Now, imagine all of creation like that. It's restored to its original beauty before it was marred by sin and decay. It's beautiful already, but these are only the before photos. So can you imagine after? Waterfalls, animals, ecosystems exactly as God designed them. Blue skies untainted by smog. Beautiful parts of God's creation causing us to gasp in wonder at his handiwork. People talk about bucket lists of places they want to see before they die. Forget that. I want to see them after I die, when God makes all things new. And not just nature, but people too, restored to our original beauty. If this is before, can you imagine how beautiful the after will be? At that time, we'll get new bodies. We won't be ghosts floating around aimlessly. We'll have bodies much like our current bodies, but not subject to disease, disabilities, arthritis, or death. The Bible describes heaven in ways that are very familiar. Rivers, trees, animals, mountains, food, friends, singing, and cities. And where there are cities, there's culture, conversation, creativity, and commerce. I expect there to be work, art, intimacy, and exploration. But there'll be no churches or temples. We won't have to go anywhere to worship God because we'll be with him all the time. Work may be something like it is today, but without all the thorns, aggravations, and pain that came when the earth was cursed, that can make work so frustrating sometimes. God is creative, so we should expect that we who are created in his image will be creators ourselves, forever building new worlds, new cities, and new beauty like he does, nurturing new life and helping others thrive. Some jobs won't be needed there. Without sin, there'll be no need for police. Without decay, no need for dentists, which makes some of you more excited about heaven already. And without death, no undertakers. But many other jobs that let us manage and continue God's work of care and creation will be there. You know how sometimes you try to draw or build or bake something that you saw on Pinterest, but whatever you end up with never looks exactly like what you pictured in your head? That's the perpetual frustration of artists. But J.R.R. Tolkien imagines a new world in which our creativity is exercised without limitations, so that we can create exactly what we dream of. And instead of our bumbling insecurity and selfishness that so often complicate our relationships, we'll be able to express exactly what we want to say, so that love will pass freely between us. Instead of eliminating desire and personality as the Eastern religions expect after death, the Bible describes constant desire and constant fulfillment, along with the perfection of personality as we finally become exactly what God originally designed each of us to be. Instead of differences between us causing divisions, we'll recognize them as different expressions of God's endless creativity. So there'll be no war, hatred, racism, or sexism. I expect us to travel and explore the new earth so that we can see its amazing beauty unsoiled by the curse of sin and unmuted by pollution or extinction. And perhaps we'll also explore other planets and galaxies. I don't know that, but we'll have plenty of time, eternity, and an eternally creative God who can keep making new galaxies faster than we can discover them. Maybe we'll tell jokes about the old days when we thought the Hubble telescope let us see really far. But won't it be boring to be good all the time? That very question suggests that we have fallen for Satan's lie. His most basic strategy is to make us believe that sin brings fulfillment, but righteousness is boring. However, in reality, sin robs us of fulfillment. Sin doesn't make life interesting, it makes life painful. Sin spoils God's greatest gifts, including love, sex, work, and relationships. Sin creates distrust, disease, uncertainty, and regret. But when sin stops distracting us from true love and the true beauty of who God is and what He created, well, then boredom becomes impossible. In heaven, we'll be filled with, as Psalm 16 describes it, with joy and eternal pleasures. Instead of always wanting more, we'll finally and fully be satisfied. Think back to one of your favorite moments in life. Maybe a day at the beach with your children, or sitting around a warm campfire with friends, standing atop a mountain admiring the awesome beauty in every direction, or experiencing the exhilaration of a kiss with someone you truly love. In those moments we might say, this is heaven, but it's not heaven, it's only earth. But we intuitively recognize that it's a glimpse of what heaven will be like when God finally restores this earth and life to what they should be. Those moments truly are small tastes of heaven that pique our anticipation. Randy Alcorn pondered whether there'll be coffee in heaven and suggested, yes. He argued, God made coffee. Coffee grows on earth, which God made for us. When God evaluated His creation, He declared the trees, along with everything else, to be good. People throughout history have enjoyed coffee, even in a fallen world where neither coffee nor our taste buds are at their best. God tells us that He richly provides us with everything for our enjoyment. So why shouldn't that include coffee? Will there be dogs in heaven? Will they talk to us? Will there be sex in heaven? Reasonable questions, and I was fascinated by the thoughtful answers I read, but I lacked the time to address them all today. But if you really want to know, I suggest a book called Heaven by Randy Alcorn. It's 1,000 pages and worth it. But if you don't have that much time, I've got a summary booklet that is really good, and I'd be glad to share with you after the surface. But the real point of all this is that life on earth matters. Not because it's the only life we have, but precisely because it isn't. It's the beginning of a life that will continue forever. Eternal life doesn't begin when we die. For those of us following Jesus, it's already begun. So what will last for eternity? Asks N.T. Wright. He answers, not your car, your house, your degrees, your trophies, your bank balance. What will last forever is every service to the needy, every dollar given to feed the hungry, every drop of water given to the thirsty, every investment in missions, every prayer for others, every interaction invested in evangelism, every moment we spent caring for children, including rocking them to sleep and changing their diapers. People can last forever, and God lasts forever, which is why our service to the needy and every dollar given to the hungry will matter forever. Therefore, Paul writes, stand firm, let nothing move you. Always give yourself fully to the work of the Lord, because you know that your labor in the Lord is not in vain. And this certainty can change us every bit as much as it changed the ancient saints into heroes through whom God could change the world. Early Christians weren't afraid to sacrifice or even die because they learned from Jesus what was waiting for them after death. Therefore, they lived without fear, selfishness, or compromise. They lived life to the full. This is exciting, but be careful. If we talk too much about heaven, then people will regurgitate the old accusation that we'll become so heavenly minded that we'll be no earthly good. But in reality, the opposite is true. C.S. Lewis observed, quote, if you read history, you'll find that the Christians who did the most for the present world were just those who thought most of the next. It's since Christians have largely ceased to think of the other world that they've become so ineffective in this, end quote. I wonder if that describes some of us sitting here today. Remembering heaven means that I don't need to seek full satisfaction during this short time before death, so I'm liberated to give my life away for a purpose greater than self-gratification. I'll have plenty of time for peace and joy in the age to come, but only now can I join God in defeating sin and overcoming injustice and rescuing people from hopelessness. Michelle and I adopted so many kids fully assuming that it would cost us happiness in this life. It would mean less travel and free time and privacy and disposable income. But we did it because we firmly believe that we will live forever and have plenty of time for all those other things when God redeems the world. But it turns out that adopting those kids has been the source of so much more joy and laughter than we'd ever imagined. In fact, almost all the things I'm most thankful for in life are the things I did in obedience to God, but which have turned out to be God's gifts to me and will continue to be as they reverberate in the age to come. But still, too many of us are like people sent on a short business trip who waste all of our time redecorating our hotel room to make it more comfy. We won't be here very long. Forget decorating. Let's get our work done so that we can get back home. And this leads us back to the passage we read earlier where Jesus taught, don't store up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but store up for yourselves treasure in heaven where moth and rust do not destroy and where thieves do not break in and steal. Jesus is saying, live in light of what you know is coming. So Jesus instructed, when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they can't repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous. We see that the way we invest our time and money today has the power to affect our eternities. You may not know that the Bible teaches that there are two judgments after death. First is the judgment that determines whether God will rescue us from sin and death to live with Him forever. A verdict we don't have to wonder or worry about because on the cross, Jesus already paid our penalty in full, and He offers complete forgiveness and new eternal life to anyone who wants to come back into relationship with Him. We have no hope on our own, and you can't earn eternal life, but you can receive it for free if you give your life back to God. But after that comes a second judgment for those who have received salvation, in which our deeds, motives, and decisions are judged, and we're rewarded accordingly. Paul writes to Christians, that we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that everyone may receive what is due them for the things done while in the body, whether good or bad. Read that verse carefully. It should give us serious pause. As should Revelation 22:12, where Jesus says, "I'm coming soon. My reward is with me, and I'll give to everyone according to what they have done." The way we live will matter for eternity. The movie Schindler's List is based on the real-life story of Oskar Schindler, a German Christian who saved thousands of Polish Jews by buying them back from the Nazis. He was a true hero. But after the war was over, at the end of the movie, Oskar, surrounded by hundreds of the people he rescued, was suddenly ashamed that he'd saved so few. Looking at his luxury car, he realized that he could have sold it to save 10 more people. And grabbing the gold pin on his chest, he knows that he could have traded it to save another 2. He was seized with remorse over his short-sighted materialism that prevented him from doing even more when he had the opportunity. And as I watch that scene, I wonder if I might ever feel that way in eternity. Looking back at all of the missed opportunities to love the hurting, feed the poor, extend grace, share the gospel, and hug my children, will I be seized with remorse over all the opportunities I missed? Will I weep over those who are not in heaven with me because I didn't want to risk embarrassment by telling them about Jesus, or I didn't live in a way that pointed them to him? Will I be ashamed to make eye contact with those who died too soon because I wanted another luxury while they lacked clean drinking water? Maybe. But I hope that the joy over what I did right, combined with the joy of God's perpetual presence, will overwhelm my regrets. I hope to meet some people there who will tell me that God used the way that I lived or something I said to touch them with love or lead them to Jesus. Will I meet people from India and Japan who learned about Jesus because we supported church plants there? Will I chat with somebody who met Jesus through our ESL or Christmas concert? Will I meet someone who got life-saving medicine at the clinic we're about to build in Congo? Will I meet kids born decades after I died who tell me that they received the faith that was passed down through the generations from a kid one of you taught this week in Kids Rock or the youth ministry? This future should affect the way we think about both our time and our money. Jesus advises us to use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves so that when it's gone, you'll be welcomed into eternal dwellings. The way we spend our time and money now will matter forever because Proverbs promises, "Those who are kind to the poor lend to the Lord, and he will reward them for what they've done." Which is why Paul commands rich Christians like us to not settle for being rich in money, but to be rich in good deeds and to be generous and willing to share. In this way, they will lay up treasure for themselves as a firm foundation for the coming age, so that they may take hold of the life that is truly life. Too few of us understand the joy of giving because we underestimate how our present actions affect eternity. Why did Moses shun the riches of Egypt? Because he was looking ahead to his reward. The way we invest our money has the spiritual power to change eternity. And, Jesus continues, the power to change our spiritual temperature right now. Many of us wish we cared more about God and others than we do, but mostly we care about ourselves and maybe our families. And we feel a little embarrassed about that. How could I develop a heart that's passionate for God and God's work in serving people in need. Though we often miss it, in this verse, Jesus is telling us how to move our hearts toward God and others in life-changing ways by pointing out that our hearts will naturally follow our treasure. We'll start to care about whatever we're invested in. And that's something I learned firsthand. When I was in high school, my grandfather invited all my cousins and me into a contest to teach us about the stock market by buying each of us a few shares of whatever company we chose. After a little research, I chose to invest in the Wrigley's Gum Company. I'd always liked gum, but I'd never paid any attention to any particular brand before. But as soon as I owned stock, I became obsessed with Wrigley's Gum. I checked the share price in the newspaper most mornings. I read the biannual letter from the CEO with great interest. I'd never buy anything but Wrigley's and hardly let my friends do it. Long after the contest ended, I sold that stock to buy Michelle an engagement ring. Today, I still chew lots of gum, but I couldn't care less what brand it is. I haven't followed the company or checked the stock price in 20 years because I'm not invested anymore. Jesus knows that money has the amazing ability to change our hearts. I don't just invest time and money in things I already care about. I start to care about anything I invest time and money in. This is why God commands us to tithe. Many people think they don't tithe because they don't care enough. Their hearts aren't enthralled by God. But the truth is that they don't care because they don't tithe. God knew that our hearts would follow our money, not the other way around. You can improve your spiritual life easily by reallocating your treasure so that you invest in heaven. Giving is the most effective way to conquer materialism. Last month, we invited you to invest in ministry here at High Rock and around the world with our Share the Blessings offering. And I'm pleased that so many of you responded. We met our goal almost exactly. So thank God and thank you. But you watch. As I start sharing stories about the new medical clinic in Congo, I'll bet that those of you who gave will be much more excited to hear about it because God used you to build it. And when I tell you stories about conversions in India, or women saved from poverty or prostitution in Sri Lanka, or people who meet Jesus here in Arlington at Cambridge, you'll care because now you're a part of that story. And now that you're invested, I hope that your heart will follow so that you'll be more likely to pray for those ministries and find more ways of getting involved in what God's doing to heal His world. On the other hand, if all of your time and money is wrapped up in your business, your body, your portfolio, your wardrobe, your gadgets, your car, your house, or your hobby, then that's what you'll care about. And you'll miss out on the life that is truly life. Rather than chasing things that won't last, I want to spend my days laying up treasure in heaven that I'll be thankful for and proud of forever. And that vision can empower us to persevere in caring for an ailing parent or repairing a broken relationship, saying no to a persistent temptation, loving strangers, forgiving sin, or giving generously. These things will last forever. Jesus promises, I am the resurrection and the life. Anyone who believes in me will live, even though they die. And whoever lives by believing in me will never die. Do you believe this? My friends, do you believe this? Is your whole life, your friendships, your finances, your family, and your future plans shaped by this reality? If we give our lives to Jesus, who gave His life for us, we will live forever. And if you do believe this, what will you have waiting for you when you get there? Have you laid up treasure in heaven? Or have you spent all of your time and money buying things here on earth? Our rewards in heaven are determined by the choices and sacrifices we make today. And God's eager to give us far more rewards than we could ever hoard here on earth. As missionary Jim Elliot famously said before being martyred on the mission field, "He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain what he cannot lose." What are you doing or pursuing today that will seem ridiculous in eternity? What choices, what purchases will you be ashamed of when everybody can see it for all time? And which ones will you be proud of and thankful for forever? Does your life make sense in light of the life to come? What might you be willing to give up? How might you be willing to serve or sacrifice? Who might you be willing to love or forgive, since you now know that you are going to live forever? The way we spend our time and money can affect eternity. That could be bad news. Or, if we're wise, it could be good news, great news. But the even better news is that we have an inheritance in heaven that we don't need to buy or earn at all. Rewards are earned. But salvation, forgiveness, and love are the free gifts that Jesus bought for us at the cross. So how will you respond? Today, as we receive communion together, we get a taste of the feast God is preparing in heaven for all those who follow Jesus as their Lord. That feast is free. It will last forever. And there's space at God's table for you.